Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of the Achieving Potential podcast on the Work and Career series. Today's topic is hard work is not a career strategy. For first-timers, Achieving Potential is a long-form podcast exploring how opportunity gaps are created and how they're closed. And across solo episodes, for the most part, and sometimes guest conversations, this show examines careers, explores child development, entrepreneurship, power systems, and everyday decision-making that quietly shape life outcomes. This isn't a motivational podcast. It's a practical, reflective space for people who sense they have more to offer, but want to understand the rules, structures, and patterns that determine who progresses and why. New episodes weekly. I spent 3 years as a Band 6 nurse working extra shifts, covering gaps, staying late to finish documentation. I was one of those people my managers could rely on, the person who said yes. However, when the Band 7 role opened up, I didn't get it. Someone else did. Someone who'd worked fewer weekends. Someone who'd spent those evenings doing a leadership module instead. That's when I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't failing because I wasn't working hard enough. I was failing because I thought hard work was the strategy. It isn't. It wasn't. Never will be. This episode is about a pattern I see constantly, repetitively, not just in the NHS, but across public and private sector. Talented, committed people who are working themselves into the ground, working themselves into exhaustion, but not moving forward, not because they lack ability, not because they lack dedication, but because they conflate effort with strategy. If you're listening to this because you're burnt out, frustrated that your work isn't being recognized, or confused about why colleagues who seem to do less advance faster than you, then this episode is for you. If you're listening because you want validation that working harder is the answer, this might be uncomfortable. Because what I'm going to argue is that in a complex organization such as the NHS, working hard without strategic positioning is often an expensive wheel-spinning exercise. It keeps you busy. It keeps you visible in the wrong ways. It keeps you stuck. This isn't about working less, it's about working differently. 3 things we'll cover. First, why hard work becomes the default career strategy for so many of us, particularly in mission-driven sectors. Second, what actually drives career progression in matrix organizations and why it's often invisible to people doing the frontline work. Thirdly, how to shift from effort-based positioning to outcome-based positioning without abandoning your values or becoming someone you don't recognize, because that's really important. This matters now because the NHS workforce is exhausted. Vacancy rates are climbing, retention is falling, and too many good people are leaving not because they can't do the work, but because they can't see a future where the work they do translates into progression, recognition, and even basic sustainability. So let's start with why we believe this story in the first place, that we're told. The effort trap. Now here's what most of us were taught, implicitly or explicitly. Work hard, be reliable, show up, do good work, and the rest will take care of itself. In clinical training, this actually works for a while. You study hard, you pass your exams, you progress through bands. There is a clear pathway. Competence equals progression. But something shifts when you move into operational or strategic roles. Suddenly, the relationship between effort and outcome becomes, I'll say, non-linear. You work harder with less recognition. You can stay later, miss conversations that matter to you and relationships. You take on more and become the person who's too valuable to promote. I call this the effort trap. It's the belief that volume, it's a proxy for value. That if you just keep demonstrating commitment, someone will notice and reward it. But here's the uncomfortable truth. In large organizations, effort is only visible to the people immediately around you. Your manager sees it, the team sees it, but the people making decisions about your role, your pay band, your strategic involvement, they're not in the room with you at 7 p.m. when you're finishing that business case. They're seeing someone else or something else entirely. What and who they're seeing are those people who speak at board meetings, the authors of papers that land on the executive desks, who gets invited to working groups that shape next year's priorities and outcomes, who has the professional vocabulary strategic framing to connect operational problems to organizational objectives. And here's where it gets tricky. Those things don't automatically follow from hard work. They come from positioning. I'll give you an example. Two people are working within digital transformation, both talented, both committed. Now, person A is drowning in project delivery, managing timelines, troubleshooting system issues, running stakeholder workshops, writing status reports. They're working evenings and weekends because the implementation deadline is tight. So they're indispensable per se. Person B is, say, doing less tactical work. They're writing a monthly briefing for the chief digital officer. They're on a national working group for EPR convergence. They've published 2 articles on clinical safety frameworks, and they're speaking at a conference in 3 months. When the associate director role opens, person B gets it. And that's not because they worked hard and not because they delivered more, but because they were visible in spaces where decisions get made. Person A feels betrayed. They feel like the system is unfair, and in some ways it is. But the system typically doesn't reward effort. It's rewarding strategic contribution. And strategic contribution requires you to step back from the operational grind long enough to make your work visible, legible to people who don't see you every day. That's the first shift. Recognizing that effort is necessary, but not altogether sufficient. Number 2, what progression actually requires. So let me be direct about what drives career movement within public sector. At least I'm speaking from experience within the NHS. And it's not competence alone, it's not effort, and it's not results alone. It's the ability to connect your work to organizational priorities in language or in a language that decision makers recognize. This is where a lot of talented people get stuck because the skills that make you excellent at delivery aren't the same skills that make you visible at a strategic level. Delivery requires focus, execution, problem solving under constraints, responsiveness. You're in the weeds. You're managing complexity. You're making things work despite the system. However, strategic visibility requires framing, synthesis, communication, and political awareness. You're connecting dots. You're translating technical into business impact. You're showing up in forums where decisions are made. Most people do one or the other. The people who progress are able to do both. Now, I'll give you a concrete example from my own experience. When I was leading an EPR implementation and the work streams within that, I was very deep in clinical safety, benefits realization, technical design workshops. I could have stayed there. I could have, kept being the person who made sure all the DCB 0129 documentation were compliant and the 5 case model business case robust. But I also knew that wasn't enough. So I started doing something very deliberate. Every month, I began to write reports, briefing reports for the board, not just a status report, not just a program update, but a brief that said, here is what we've delivered this month. Here are our risks that have been mitigated. Here's the strategic value. I began to frame my technical work in terms of organizational outcomes and link them to the organizational strategy, board assurance framework. I made my work legible to people who didn't live within the detail of implementation, and that changed everything. Not because the work itself was different, but because the way the work was perceived was different. And that's what I mean by strategic positioning. It's not about gaming the system. I've said this before. It's not about doing less work. It's about making sure the work you do is understood in the context that matters for your progression. Let's say there are 3 dimensions of strategic positioning. First is visibility in decision-making spaces. That means being in the room or adjacent where priorities get set. That could be working groups at board level. It might be a national network like the Federal Digitization Program and workshops. And that might be a professional body. But it means your name and your thinking are beginning to be known to people beyond your immediate environment. Second is your professional credibility outside of your organization. This is about building a reputation within your field, writing, speaking, teaching, contributing to guidance or framework, it signals that you are not just internally competent. Your recognition is external to your organization, and that begins to change how you are perceived internally as well. Thirdly, your ability to frame problems at the right altitude. Operational people talk about tasks. Strategic people talk about outcomes. If you're explaining your work in terms of what you did, you're operating at the long level. And sometimes this comes across when you're writing your personal statement. If you're explaining your work in terms of what's changed because of what you've done, then you're getting closer to the truth and what you need for that step change. None of this diminishes the importance of delivery. You still have to execute. You still have to be good at your job. But execution alone won't move the needle, at least not within the public sector that I work in, and not at this pace. Now, let's talk about the invisible curriculum. I call it the invisible curriculum because I think it's a set of unwritten rules about progression and how it works. These rules are obvious to people who grew up in maybe professional families or went to certain universities or had mentors that have explained how these things work. If you've come into healthcare from a clinical background, or you might be first person in your family or in your network to work in a strategic role, or if you learned your job by doing it rather than by studying organizational behavior, then these rules might not be obvious at all. But here are some of them. 1. Your manager is not responsible for your career. They're responsible for your performance in your current role. If you want to progress, you need to manage that yourself. 2. Loyalty to your team is not the same as loyalty to your career. Saying yes to everything makes you reliable. It does not make you promotable. 3. People who get promoted are not the ones who know the most. They're the ones who can communicate what they know in ways that influence decisions. 4. Your CV is not a record of what you did. It's a story about what you delivered and what you're capable of delivering next. 5. Being good at your job is the entrance requirement. What differentiates you is whether you can also see the system around your job and position yourself within it. 6. Time spent on professional development is not selfish, it's very strategic. The people who progress are often people who invest in becoming more valuable, not just busy. This is what I call the invisible curriculum, and it's why you see people who seem less committed, less hardworking, progressing faster than you. They're not cheating, they're just playing a different game. A game where the rules are about positioning, not just effort. And here's the part that's really uncomfortable to say out loud. If you don't learn these rules, you stay where you are, not because you're not good enough, but because the system doesn't reward effort in the absence of strategic framing. You can be angry about that. I was. Or you can decide to learn the rules and use them. Now, what does efficiency actually mean? The original question behind this episode was about working more efficiently without sacrificing productivity. Well, here's the reframe. Efficiency is not about doing the same work faster. It's about doing different work that has higher leverage. Most of us think of efficiency as time management. How do I get my task list done quicker? How do I automate this process? How do I reduce times in my meetings? How do I do more with less? These things help, but they are optimizing at the wrong level. Real efficiency in career terms means asking, what work will move me forward? And what work is just keeping me busy? So again, I tend to use frameworks or analogies. So let me categorize my work into 4 types. Type 1 is work that delivers immediate operational value, but has no strategic visibility. This is necessary, but it should be minimized or delegated where possible. Type 2 is work that delivers both operational value and strategic visibility. This is your sweet spot because this is the kind of work that solves real problems and gets you noticed. Type 3, work that delivers strategic visibility but limited operational value. So this probably things like speaking, writing, professional networking. It feels unproductive in the moment, but can be critical for long-term positioning. And then type 4, which is work that delivers neither operational value nor strategic visibility, which is the kind of work you should stop doing. When I audited myself against this framework in the last 12 months, I realized I was spending about 70% of my time on type 1 work, which is work that kept things moving but didn't position me for progression. So I made a deliberate shift. I started protecting time for type 3 work. An hour a week writing, 2 hours a month on professional networks, picking up any speaking opportunities per quarter. Did it make me less productive in the short term? Yes, I was doing fewer tasks, but did it make me more effective in terms of career progression? Absolutely, it did. Because the work that matters for career movement is not the work that fills your day. It's the work that changes how you're perceived and what opportunities become available to you. So that's what efficiency means at that level. It's not about working faster. It's about working on the right things. So I'm inviting you to share this perspective shift. We often treat careers like meritocracies. We believe that if you do good work, you'll be rewarded, that the best people rise to the top like cream, but that's not how it works. Careers are like markets. And in markets, value isn't necessarily intrinsic. Value is perceived. You can be incredibly talented, incredibly hardworking, but if people making decisions about your career don't perceive that value, it doesn't matter. This isn't fair, but it is predictable. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. People who progress are not the ones that work the hardest. They are people who understand perception of value within their organizations and position themselves accordingly. So that might mean writing papers that land on the executive desk, on the board. It might mean speaking at conferences and participating in working groups where strategy gets shaped. It might mean developing a presence outside your organization that changes how you're seen within it. But it also means sometimes stepping back from the operational grind long enough to do work that makes your value visible. And this isn't about becoming political. It's not about abandoning your value. It's not about doing less good work. It's about recognizing that within complex organizations, talent without positioning is invisible. And invisible talent goes unrewarded. So here are some practical takeaways for this episode. Hard work is your baseline. It's necessary, but it's not a strategy. 5 practical shifts you can make. 1. Audit your time against the 4-type framework I've just described. What percentage of your work delivers strategic visibility? If less than 20%, you're optimizing for the wrong outcome. 2. Identify the decision-making spaces that are adjacent to your role. Who's in the room when priorities get set? Who's writing the papers that shape strategy? How do you become more visible? You might want to volunteer for working groups, writing briefing papers, learning those skills. It might mean asking your manager to present your work at a higher level. 3. Build your professional credibility outside your organization. Write something, speak somewhere, join networks. External recognition changes your perception internally. It signals that you are not just competent in a localized environment. You're beginning to get recognized in your field. Number 4, reframe your work and use outcomes language. Stop explaining what you did. Start talking about what has changed because of what you did. Practice this in every update, in every briefing paper, conversations, summaries. It's a very, very different way of thinking and it takes practice, but it's how people speak strategically. Number 5, protect time for type 3 work. Put it in your calendar, treat it as a non-negotiable because work that feels unproductive in the moment is often work that creates opportunity for the future. So that's really important to take away. And like I said, type 3 work is work that delivers strategic visibility, but limited operational value. So, in closing, just wanted to say I started this episode with a story about not getting a promotion despite working harder than anyone around me. That experience was painful, but it made me question the system, whether my work mattered, whether I was missing something fundamental about organizational work, and I was. And what I was missing was the recognition that hard work was only visible to people in my locality, and that my progression was determined usually by people adjacent. So make your work visible. That's not a compromise. You're not selling out. It's not becoming someone you're not. Because oftentimes people who are mission driven feel that way. It's recognizing that talent and effort are only valuable if they're perceived as valuable by people making decisions about your future. It's a hard lesson, but it's a useful one. And once you see it, you can act on it, and that changes everything. Thanks for listening. I'll see you on the next one.